Hello and welcome to Midcoast Morning, CHLY's weekly current affairs show. I'm Joe Pugh.
And I'm Elijah Robinson.
Here's what we're following this week.
Vancouver Island University has a new chancellor, Kekinusuqs, or Dr. Judith Sayers. I spoke with Dr. Sayers about her position and issues in local indigenous communities.
And Nanaimo is dipping its toes into the world of social enterprise. The Island Crisis Care Society is purchasing the Nanaimo Bakery on Bowen Road. I talked with the Assistant Executive Director of the Society, Corrie Corfield, about the purchase and what we can expect from the bakery going forward.
Plus, the Nanaimo RCMP released their monthly report on calls for service, with check wellness calls topping the list of police interventions. I spoke with Constable Gary O'Brien of the RCMP about these checks and why there have been so many lately.
And finally, Craig Taylor is back home in Nanaimo, but he spent most of the last decade living life in the Big Apple, interviewing hundreds of New Yorkers from all walks of life. I spoke with the author about the result of those years of work, his new book, New Yorkers, A City and Its People in Our Time. We begin, however, with a look at the week's headlines from Elijah Robinson.
This Canada Day, Nanaimo residents are invited to enjoy local entertainment and food provided by food truck vendors at the city's various parks. Laura Kelsey will be performing at Neck Point Park, Gigi and the Ice Machine will be at Departure Bay, and Dave Hart will be at Maffeo Sutton Park. The City of Nanaimo team will also be giving out prizes through community engagement challenges, as well as handing out Reimagine Nanaimo swag to help you show your Harbor City spirit. The City of Nanaimo Spirit team can be found at Maffeo Sutton Park, Westwood Lake Park, Neck Point Park, Piper's Lagoon Park, Departure Bay Walkway, and Harewood Centennial Park. Additionally, a Canada Day themed story walk will take place at Departure Bay, Kinhut, and Harewood Centennial Park. The event is free and all ages are welcome. Although many COVID restrictions are scheduled to be lifted on July 1st, those attending these events are asked to follow the latest provincial health orders. Speaking of COVID, people aged 12 and up can now receive their first dose of the COVID-19 vaccine at a temporary walk-in clinic at Woodgrove Mall. The clinic opened on Tuesday, June 22nd, while its closing date has yet to be determined. The site is located next to La Senza on the north end of the mall. Its hours of operations are 2 to 6 p.m. Monday to Friday, 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. on Saturdays, and 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. on Sundays. The clinic is open for adults and youth in need of their first dose of the vaccine only. To confirm your vaccination appointment, first dose or second, you can register and book an appointment through the provincial Get Vaccinated system. Also set to take place on July 1st is the implementation of Nanaimo's checkout bag regulation bylaw. Single-use plastic bags at checkouts will be prohibited and stores will be mandated to sell reusable bags or offer paper bags at the cost of 15 cents per bag. Retailers won't be allowed to offer bags to customers free of charge. Honorable George Heyman, Minister of Environment and Climate Change Strategy, announced approval of Nanaimo's checkout bag regulations bylaw on February 12, 2021. The Nanaimo City Council unanimously adopted the bylaw on February 22, 2021. In other news, Nanaimo's community members are invited to nominate businesses that may be deserving of winning at this year's Nanaimo Business Awards. Although the awards won't be until early October, the call for nominations ends on June 28th. The Greater Nanaimo Chamber of Commerce hosts the awards, but nominations in the 17 categories are not limited to Chamber of Commerce members. Nominations can be made at www.nanaimochamber.bc.ca. Once more, that's www.nanaimochamber.bc.ca.
Kekinusuqs, or Dr. Judith Sayers, was officially installed as VIU's chancellor on Thursday, June 17th. Sayers is a member and former elected chief of the Hupechesith First Nation, and is currently the president of the Nuu-chah-nulth Tribal Council. Elijah spoke with Sayers about the significance of her new position, the installment ceremony, and ongoing issues in Indigenous communities.
First off, I just noticed at the ceremony on the 17th, officially installing you as VIU's chancellor, you pledged your dedication to VIU's progress and vowed to work to the best of your ability for the betterment of the students, community, and country. Can you elaborate on your responsibilities as chancellor?
Well, my responsibilities of chancellor are to to promote and support the university in their endeavors. And I'm on the Board of Governors as well as the Senate, so I can have, a say over policy development and direction of the university. So, and then of course I preside over graduations, which only happens twice a year. So the bigger responsibilities I think are um, to promote and to change, the university. And I really think that, that we can do better in eradicating racism and to making the campus safe, for all our students and in particular Indigenous people. And so those are some of the things that I would really like to work on in my term as chancellor.
Okay, for sure. And can you tell me what that looks like, or if you have any current projects in the works to fill that desire?
I don't specifically. I have been chancellor since the end of October. It was just a matter of taking, the oath that was just done to install me. So I'm exploring a lot of the existing policies and programs so I can, suggest changes or different methods and really getting, into the whole board and working with the president. And yeah, so this is just a um, it's not a full-time commitment by any way. So I try and fit it into my schedule, and try and make it a priority when the time allows.
Okay, for sure. And I understand that you have a plethora of accomplishments under your belt, and advocacy is where you really stand out, and you have plenty of years of experience in that field.
Yes, definitely.
For sure. So, what kind of time commitment are you putting towards? I know you mentioned that it's a bit of a lesser role, but what can you expect coming from your position as chancellor in the coming years?
Well, it's for a 3-year term, and my time commitment can be anywhere from a day of board meetings and then any of my other readings and responsibilities. I've been writing a lot of speeches, for grad and welcome to the students for next fall, and a lot of those kinds of things, as well as just trying to become a lot more familiar with the policies that guide the university.
Okay, for sure. And you had also mentioned that you did start your term as chancellor back in October.
That's
What
correct.
So what does it mean to you to be officially installed now, especially now that tensions amongst Indigenous communities are fairly high?
I think that, it's all part of the process, and I would love to have, done the oath and the installation, back in early November, but, COVID just wouldn't let us do that. And so, we put it off, and but I think, it's really important for the public to see me take on the responsibilities onto my shoulders and make my commitments and to state my intentions, to the students, the staff, the faculty, and anyone who's connected to the university. But I think setting a good example for other universities is very important. So I think all of that falls into the role.
Okay, for sure. And speaking more to that, VIU currently has both an Indigenous president and an Indigenous chancellor, and the two of you also identify as women. I know you touched on that at the ceremony, but can you speak to the significance of that dynamic?
Well, I really don't think there is another university in Canada, I could be wrong, that has both an Indigenous chancellor and president. And I think this is really significant because, a large part of our priorities is, giving education to everybody, but also to addressing the barriers and challenge that Indigenous students face at the university. And can we make it easier? Can we, make it a safer place for them to be? Can we focus on new ways of doing research? It doesn't always have to be written, it could be in different mediums, it could be, so finding ways to be more flexible, to reflect Indigenous people worldviews and ways of doing things. I think that, from the top, we set the leadership and we work with everybody to try and change mindsets and, find new and innovative ways to accommodate Indigenous learners and others as well.
For sure. And I know you had also mentioned the significance of wearing Nanaimo regalia, and a part of your decision in taking on the role as chancellor was due to the prior relations that the institution of VIU has made with the local Indigenous communities. Can you speak to that history that you know of?
Sure. I know this president and the president before was very intent on developing relationships with Nanaimo, Cowichan, and Cla'aman because there's campuses on each of those territories, and that it was really important for them to acknowledge and recognize their territories and to try and incorporate their values into the university as well. Um, just developing that relationship to support them if they need courses or training for their people, and just working together to do that. There's an elders advisory council that's consisting of elders from those three communities, and I've had the opportunity to meet with them, and they're an awesome group. They're very gave me a lot of good guidance and direction the first time I met them, and they also give that kind of guidance and direction to the president. So I think some of those things that were already in place are good, and we can work on strengthening it, working closer with the communities. What else that we can do to collaborate? So yeah, I think it's a good thing. There are other groups on the island beside the Coast Salish. There's the Nishnawmut and the Kwakwaka'wakw. and also because we have students from there as well. So it's also developing relationships with them. And I know those are in place. I know in my role as president of the NTC that we had started working on a course with VIU. And so I know that those opportunities are available and that the university is open to doing things like that. And we just need to find more opportunities to do so.
For sure. Yeah, that makes sense. And also, as a leader and a trailblazer, can you kind of speak to the importance of Indigenous resurgence, especially on campus?
Well, I think Indigenous resurgence has been happening all along. As we have been asserting ourselves as a people and our rights. When I first started getting out into politics in the late 80s, it's very, very difficult to get even a newspaper article about our issues. Today we see those issues in the paper on a daily basis, many stories. We have, pushed the political agenda, on our rights in the courts, on the ground, wherever we can, trying to ensure our languages flourish. People are taking a greater role in strengthening our nations, getting an education, being more outspoken. And I think this resurgence will continue, especially, we see more and more young people taking on those roles, and that's really important that, they step up to the plate, become, and in our way, they become the warriors in that they protect and push our issues. Not in the usual sense of the word, but we often talk about Indigenous warriors, and that's what we do. That's you do that every day of your life, and so I think that plus educating people about our issues is another part of that resurgence. With this finding all these young people's burial sites at Kamloops and now at other locations of residential schools, it was a good opportunity to educate people about the legacy of residential schools, what happened. And so those opportunities come along now and again, UNDRIP and, federal government passing legislation, BC passing legislation, and people are asking, what does this mean? What are we going to do? And we're answering those questions. And so I think the resurgence of Indigenous people is a huge movement now. Or at least we're being recognized. I don't think before we were, even though we tried.
For sure. Yeah, I totally agree. And speaking to what's happening in the news right now, and as you had mentioned, there's more attention to it. I was wondering if I can ask what your thoughts are on the current movement to cancel Canada Day festivities that's kind of popping up around the country.
Okay, so I'm going to speak from a personal point of view. Our tribal council has no views, and we haven't discussed it. But personally, people can celebrate what they want to celebrate. I'm not going to tell them not to celebrate Canada Day. It would be really nice if they started off their days, with a moment of silence, respecting those lives that were lost, and knowing and acknowledging that's part of the history of Canada. I don't know that people would do that, because as Indigenous peoples, we've never really celebrated Canada Day. What is there? What is there to celebrate? We still are not part of the country. We're behind economically, socially, in almost every way. So, I've never celebrated Canada Day, and so to me, it doesn't make any difference. They can, so I respect people's right to celebrate, what they want to do. It doesn't impact me. And it's also nice. I really appreciate like the city of Victoria saying we're not going to celebrate. We're going to do this because we don't agree with it because of what was the children that were found at Cam, and I really respect that, and it really makes my heart feel good. But and I'm not saying that's wrong. It's their choice. They decided to do that, and everybody has that right.
For sure. Lastly, as a young Indigenous student kind of coming up, one question I've often struggled with is the notion of tokenism that's kind of seems somewhat prevalent in today's culture. And I was wondering if you could kind of speak to the difference between, genuine action and, that notion of tokenism.
Well, I think it is what we make it. If I just wanted to sit back, accept the chancellorship, then I think that's tokenism. But, if I take that opportunity to step in, raise my voice, make positive changes, I think that's different. I think one reporter says, well, why do you want to be a chancellor? And it's a colonial institute. Well, how do we change colonial institutes? We can try from the outside or we can try from the inside. And I just chose to do it from the inside and to, use my lobbying efforts, my expertise in trying to change things. And I can do that with governments. I can do that within the university. And so, tokenism is definitely an issue. And, if you ever feel you get into a position where you are being treated as a token, you can get off of it. Otherwise, if you have the opportunity to get in, step in, make a difference, a good difference, mind you, then do it. Because there are the two approaches, and you just have to decide which one you want to do. I just appeared before the Senate, and they wanted to know if it was on the net zero emissions for Canada, and they wanted to know if it would be tokenism to appoint an Indigenous advisory body. Well, it depends on the roles, the responsibility you give them, and if they have a strong voice and climate change, more power to them. And that's what I said, you got to make sure that there's strength behind any body that you set aside, or it is tokenism.
Okay, for sure. Thank you for your insight. That's wonderful. And that concludes everything that I had. Is there anything else you think people should know about the ceremony or your position?
No, I just think it was great that we could combine First Nations protocol and respect for the First Nations with the university protocols and things that we had to do. And because ceremonies are so important, and combining the two just strengthen what, we acknowledge both, and that's good. So no, but other than that, I think that's about all.
CHLY's Elijah Robinson speaking with the newly installed Chancellor of VIU, Dr. Judith Sayers, or Kekinusuqs.
A longtime Nanaimo business is becoming one of the city's first social enterprises. The Island Crisis Care Society is buying the Nanaimo Bakery and Confectionary at the end of July. To find out what this means for the Bowen Road business, our Joe Pugh spoke with Corrie Corfield, Assistant Executive Director of Island Crisis Care.
Can you provide me a quick outline of what the Island Crisis Care Society does?
Sure. So, Island Crisis Care Society is a nonprofit operating in Nanaimo and Oceanside communities, and we have been operating in Nanaimo since 1989. We currently have 12 programs across 7 sites, and we offer support to individuals who are experiencing or at risk of homelessness in the community. So everything from shelter housing through Samaritan House and now Prideaux Place, up to supportive housing, long-term permanent supportive housing, and we also offer some outreach and rent subsidy type programming as well for clients moving on to next steps.
And at the end of next month, you're buying and taking over the Nanaimo Bakery and Confectionary on Bowen Road. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Correct. So as a nonprofit organization in the community, we've kind of, we struggle sometimes with funding, and we are heavily government funded. Probably just over 90% of our funding comes through contracts with government, which is wonderful, and we're grateful for that support. And it's meant that we've been able to support a lot of people and offer some really great programming. But one of the challenges is that we are always sort of at the will of the funding. And so for a number of years, ICCS has been looking at opportunities to diversify our funding sources and find new ways to support the programming that we offer, and also give us the opportunity to, offer more enhanced programming that would support what we already have operating. So we've kind of been working on that for a number of years, but most specifically in the last 6 months, we were able to access some funding through the Community Foundation's Investment Readiness Program, and we engaged a social enterprise consultant at Scale Collaborative in Victoria, and we started working on a plan to move forward to find an opportunity for social enterprise that would basically enhance our programming, and give us a bunch of different directions we could go to, and also be an additional source of revenue for our programming. We came across the building at 2025 Bowen Road, which also houses the Nanaimo Bakery and Confectionary, and it was just a really good fit. We saw a lot of potential to support our community through, job placements, job readiness, other community-facing programming, that sort of thing. And then, of course, having a functioning business that was already well-established and well-loved in the community was an added bonus for us, that we'd be able to sort of step into an existing business. And in the sector, it's called a social enterprise conversion or social purpose conversion. So basically taking that functioning for-profit business, and it's going to do the same business that it always has, only now it will have a social purpose in the community.
And so you just mentioned it's going to do the same business that it always has. Are there any changes people can expect to see at the bakery?
Yeah, I mean, we love the Nanaimo Bakery. They've got some amazing products there. We have to say we indulge every once in a while in our office and enjoy the great baked goods. And we know people in the community really love it. It's been around just about as long as ICCS has. So there's a lot of long-standing customers in the community who love the Nanaimo Bakery. So we want to keep that consistency and help people have the same customer experience and enjoy the same products. But as we grow and develop the business, we'll be looking at new opportunities to maybe create some community spaces where people can come together and get to know each other, and over a bite of lunch or a cup of coffee. We will be sort of building that business as a functioning for-profit business. And eventually we'll be implementing our employment program at ICCS. which means we'll be taking some of our clients and then others in the community who have faced barriers to employment in the past, helping them to learn some skills around employment, learning about, how to do an interview and how to write a resume and just showing up to work and some of those really important skills, and then offering work placements within the bakery. So we really think it'll be a positive experience for clients and for the customers at the bakery as well, just getting to engage with each other and get to know each other a little bit better.
Is there any precedent for this kind of thing in Nanaimo that you're aware of? Any other social enterprises?
Yeah, it's sort of a new and evolving thing in the nonprofit sector. There's very few who've gone about it the same way that we have, which is that we've actually formed a for-profit corporation called Rising Hope Services, Inc. So we formed this corporation, and then the corporation will actually own and operate the business. So there's not a lot of precedence for that here in Nanaimo. A little bit through BC, a lot more organizations through the east. So in Ontario, we're doing similar. We've looked around at different other great organizations doing great work. We know everybody knows Cocoa Cafe in Nanaimo, who have done amazing. They have more of a cooperative structure rather than the specific structure we're going with. But again, it's a similar concept where we have a business that is, operating as a business, but also serving a purpose and a function in the community that's supporting a portion of the community that needs some extra support.
And is there anything you'd like to highlight about Island Crisis Care Society, or anything you feel like people should know about the work you're doing? We're a very expanding organization. We've kind of taken on a lot of bigger projects over the last few years. And we see the real need in the community. And, it's hard to get caught in the immediacy of the needs of those facing homelessness in our community. And, we do offer a lot of programming for those needs of helping people, where they're at, whatever their situation is, whatever, crises they're facing, or whatever issues around the mental health and substance use, homelessness, poverty, all of those really important issues we've been addressing. And it's really important not to lose sight of the immediacy of those needs. But what we see in this project and this opportunity is actually to look beyond those immediate needs and start thinking about what could be next for the people that we support. We have a really great opportunity in our programming that we see people come from, those moments of crisis, moving through this kind of continuum of care where they get, find stable housing, they find the supports they need to, move through whatever challenges that they're facing. And then they kind of come to the end of that cycle, and then they struggle because there's a lack of housing, there's a lack of jobs. Maybe they don't have the job history, or they don't have, a great resume that they can go and start looking for work. Or maybe some even have criminal records, that sort of thing that cause a lot of barriers to them taking the next steps when they're ready, which is frustrating. It's hard to kind of work so hard in your life to get to a certain point, and then, what's next for you. And so this was our sort of answer to that we wanted to give people an opportunity to take those next steps, build up their resume, learn some new skills, and then eventually give back as well. So it's kind of giving us one more thing on that continuum of care that we're really excited to see people move through. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me.
Yeah, no worries. I really appreciate it.
Corrie Corfield, Assistant Executive Director of Island Crisis Care, speaking with CHLY's Joe Pugh about the upcoming purchase and social purpose conversion of the Nanaimo Bakery and Confectionary. This week, Quadra Island band Mother Mother released a topical new album, Inside. From that album, here is Sick of the Silence.
You're listening to Midcoast Morning. We're currently looking for a show sponsor. Email sales@chly.ca. On Monday, June 21st, the Nanaimo RCMP released a report on their calls for service in the month of May, and check wellness calls topped the list. Elijah spoke with Constable Gary O'Brien about the checks and why there have been so many of them.
So to start off, the Nanaimo RCMP received 4,250 calls for service in the month of May, which was a 10% increase from May 2020. I was wondering if you could speak to the potential reason for that 10% increase?
Well, the 10% increase is a number of things. Definitely the number one factor is COVID. And our town basically shut down for about 12 months. And people are coming back out of their cocoons now and getting back to normal life. And we're seeing a lot more activity on the streets. And hence, we're seeing a lot more check well-being calls. But what we're seeing with check well-being calls, even before COVID hit, was that the numbers are significant and are continuing to rise every month.
Yeah, and I noticed that the check well-being calls made up the most calls at 7%, or nearly 300 calls in May. I understand these types of calls often have a mental health component to them. I was wondering if you could elaborate on what these calls typically entail.
Yeah, certainly. There's a number of facets to check well-being calls. Many times they're a family member or a close friend who somebody hasn't been able to contact for several days, which is out of character for them, or maybe that individual said or did something that caused the other person concerned. Individuals will call us and ask us to go check on that person and do an assessment, and that's what we'll do. And we know that many times those calls can be volatile, especially if they're in a mental health crisis. So we often go with 2, sometimes 3 police officers to these calls, and they take some time. The individual may have to be apprehended under the Mental Health Act and taken to a hospital for assessment, or other times they just need somebody to talk to, and they have to be prepared to talk to them for some time. They take a lot of work. We're very fortunate with our check well-being calls now to have a full-time officer who's classified as a mental health liaison officer. And this individual is working with 2 certified nurses who are outreach nurses. They're not police officers. And they're taking up about 10 to 15% of the check well-being calls, and they're dealing with the really hard to reach, often repeat clients that we deal with. And as a result, we're seeing a significant impact or making inroads into some people who have chronic, unchecked mental health issues.
Right. And is the mental health liaison, is that common practice for the RCMP, or is this fairly innovative?
Yeah, it is becoming quite common now, especially in BC. I can't speak for other provinces, but I know that Constable Josh Waltman, who's our mental health liaison officer, we call it MHLO, he says there's a network across British Columbia of other larger detachments who have this designated person. Smaller detachments may not be afforded the opportunity because they only have so many members. So to designate one in a full-time capacity would have a significant impact on other resources in their detachment. Well, we're large. We have 160 members, so we can do that. We're actually looking at expanding our MHLO role into 2, maybe 3 police officers. But that really depends on how receptive the city of Nanaimo is for allowing the funds to be released to create those positions. Right.
And I think from the statistics, as well as the need for these mental health liaisons, it seems like it reveals something about the current climate in Nanaimo. Can you speak to that a little bit more?
Yeah, there is an appetite, and the RCMP recognizes that too. They're a very volatile, sensitive situation. Often you're dealing with marginalized people. Often you're dealing with racial situations where people maybe have had a bad or negative contact with police officers. We are extremely aware of that, and that's why we're moving towards an increased role on the mental health liaison officer side. everybody benefits from it, especially with the connection that our officer makes with the people who are often marginalized. They're establishing a trust and rapport with them, which we didn't have before. And that makes it a win-win.
Okay, for sure. And I also noticed that disturbances was tied for second in the most calls at about 6% with mischief and theft. And I was just looking through the report, and I noticed one anecdote about a disturbance call that was made, and the officers ended up calling back the person who had initially called about the perpetrator of the disturbance, and informed them that that person is currently homeless and has significant mental health issues coupled with drug addiction. Is this fairly common for calls of disturbances?
Yes, sadly it is. We have a number of people in our community who not only have mental health issues, but are marginalized and have no fixed address. And sadly, their state of norm is not like ours, where they might be in a drug psychosis or their mental health issues overriding. So they may start screaming, acting erratically, and this concerns a lot of people who are just going about their daily activities. Or they may be driving by, walking by, biking, and seeing the activity, and they will call us. And often, just by the description and where it's happening, we often know who that person is. And in this particular case, we did. Based on the description of the female, we knew who the person was, and we told the caller that we're doing what we can to try to connect her with our outreach services. Sometimes it takes several attempts. Sometimes we're not successful at all, and they fall through the cracks. And so that's the reality of policing in most municipalities throughout our province.
Okay, for sure. I'm wondering, is calling the emergency line the best way to report or respond to these types of disturbances?
No. 911 is for an emergency. It's life or death. It's a crime happening right now. Whereas this individual may have been causing a disturbance, it's not an emergency. The only police line you should call for something like that would be the non-emergency line, which is 250-754-2345. 911 is also for police, fire, or ambulance. Fire is obvious. Ambulance is someone who's having a medical emergency. We only have so many designated 911 lines throughout the province, and for somebody to call with something like, I saw somebody acting suspicious, or somebody stole my lawnmower from my back shed 4 days ago, that is not an emergency. So we're hoping people will respect that, because they could potentially be saving lives by holding back, then calling the non-emergency line.
Okay, for sure. And I know you had mentioned that some people aren't, quite accustomed to, the people who are living in a different lifestyle and experiencing homelessness or without fixed addresses. I was wondering what can we do, the people who are kind of witnessing that, what can we do to kind of better educate ourselves about their situation?
That's a great question. I would say the first thing is to be empathetic and show these people a little bit of respect, which they often don't get. Just because you're homeless and you're marginalized and you have a mental health issue doesn't mean you're not a human being. And you'd be shocked at the number of times that I have walked by an individual who is obviously in distress. And I'll say, "Good morning, sir. How are you, ma'am?" or something to that effect. And you could see their eyes brighten up, because often people will just choose to ignore them, walk by when they're sprawled on the sidewalk, or give them a dirty look. That's not fair, because any one of us could be in that situation given different circumstances in our lives. The other thing, too, is maybe you can reach out in your own way. Is there something that you can do to make their lives a little better? If you see someone who's in your neighborhood and they're walking down your street every day pushing a shopping cart, not causing any harm, and you see that they're basically barefoot, or the sneakers or runners or shoes they have on their feet, the sole's falling off, look around your house. Is there a pair of boots or runners that you don't wear anymore? Often we have that. What about giving it to the person? Or if it's in inclement weather, giving them a jacket or maybe a hot coffee. That gesture can have a significant impact on their life. So these are the little things. The other ones, if you're not comfortable and you see somebody who's in distress, and you don't know whether it's from drugs, you don't know whether it's from a mental health issue or whatnot, contact our office on our emergency line. Let our office know. Our officers will go out and check on the person. You can also call the mental health crisis line to let people know, and they will send out an outreach worker to assess that person. That might be enough to get them into the hospital, to give them medication, to get them stabilized. Or it might be just enough to have somebody go out and check on them and have a dialogue with them. So these are the little things that people can do.
Okay, for sure. Thank you for that. Lastly, I was just wondering if there was anything else about the May report that you think people should know, or anything about any of these other topics that we've spoken on.
People should know that the officers, the men and women of Nanaimo, they are committed. They are professionals 24/7, and they work hard. And they're doing what they can to keep our community safe. We make mistakes all the time, and we'll be the first ones to admit it. And if you have an issue with what we do, please let us know, because we want to get better.
Perfect. Well, I just wanted to say thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
CHLY's Elijah Robinson speaking with Constable O'Brien of the Nanaimo RCMP.
These days, Craig Taylor is back home in Nanaimo, but for most of the last 5 years, he was living and breathing the Big Apple like perhaps no one had before. For his latest book, New Yorkers, A City and Its People in Our Time, Craig picked up sticks and lived in New York for years, interviewing hundreds of people from all different walks of life. The result is a tome that transports you to the seething mass of humanity and occasionally inhumanity that is America's largest city. Earlier in the year, Joe spoke with Craig Taylor about the book and his experiences living and writing it.
In the book, we hear from a lot of diverse voices. There's an elevator repairman, a personal injury lawyer, but there's also people like the voice of the Brooklyn Nets. I'm wondering, how did you decide whose stories to tell?
It was a very organic process. I landed in New York in 2014, and I just sort of went out into the city and tried to find interesting people to speak to. And there's a lot of miss in the hit and miss. But generally, I was just guided by verbs. I have a list of verbs that I use, and I try to find people who enact these words. So it's really a project about action, about people doing things in New York, and that became a framework that I could use in order to go out into the city and try to get a sense of what people are doing there, how they live in New York.
As I read it, I kept wondering about the logistics of it all. How do you actually go about meeting the people, even from the perspective of, a lot of people move to new cities in their life, and they're not necessarily even trying to write a book, but how do you integrate yourself in a community? Can you talk a little bit about that, how that process went for you?
Yeah, it's a lot of cold calls. It's a lot of I lean on a lot of organizations, which is often very helpful. And so you can call up different organizations in the city and explain the project. Most people think it's crazy. They don't know really how to respond. But then eventually there's a momentum that picks up, and people want to introduce you to others. And even walking around a city like New York is helpful, because you see different stores, different types of people, different jobs, and think, oh, I've got to try to get someone attached to that profession, or maybe I should go into this shop and speak to someone who's a neighborhood butcher. So it's a very organic process. You just try to take in as much of the city as possible.
At one point you talked to even like a car thief. How can you set up something like that?
Well, that one, that was serendipity. I got to know him socially, and then he revealed, this profession. And then he went on to tell me a little bit about what it's like to steal cars in Manhattan. So yeah, you just have to sort of sponge it in. People will have these experiences, and And I just wanted to be out there in the world. That was my main research tactic.
Mm. And you say also at one point in the book that the project is in a way for you, and it contains a lot of life lessons for you, and it teaches you how to listen. Can you share some tips on how the book kind of made you a better listener, how we can all be better listeners?
Yeah, I think it's a really important trait these days. I mean, we live in a very loud time where people aren't necessarily listening to each other. And so these projects, at least for me, serve as a reminder that we should be listening to each other. There is a time to speak, but there's also a time to really just listen to the experiences of others, and especially others who are different than you. And New York is wonderful because no matter who you are, there is your other there. And so this project in a lot of ways was a great excuse to listen to people, to learn very practical things about a great city like New York, like where to get the best bagels, but also, to tap into these deeper questions of how do we live amongst each other? How do we live in cities? How do we live compassionately? All of those questions were answered by various people who were interviewed in the book.
You mentioned what a diverse city New York is, and in the book we hear a lot of diverse voices. There are a lot of heavy themes on institutions. Race comes up frequently. Was that something you wanted to seek out, or did it happen more organically?
It was organic too. I mean, I always let people take the conversation where they want to take it. And for some, there were some very, important issues that needed to be addressed. I think in speaking to a lot of Black New Yorkers, obviously the issue of race comes up. And from 2014 to now, there were just all of these different inflection points, different police killings, different events in the city, the death of Eric Garner. So yeah, there were a lot of directions that people wanted to go in, and I was there to not to guide them to my own view, but to really just let them go, and in that way to see, what the important issues of the city were. If enough people talk about real estate disease, then I think, oh well, maybe that is one of the very important issues of our time.
Throughout the book, the theme of being a New Yorker was kind of constant. Some people decided like, oh, it's a few months, or I just got here last week, but I'm a New Yorker. But it seemed like you yourself never really considered yourself a New Yorker. Is that fair?
Oh, I think that phrase to me was something that was interesting to put in front of people and see how they reacted. Of course, you're born there. You embraced it from an early age. Some people who had moved there were adamant that they were New Yorkers. And then some just, they were too busy working to even care. And for me, I realized that in order to call myself a New Yorker, I would have to invest much more than 6 years there. That was my own personal feeling, that I got a sense of just the vast and the complexity of that place. And so I would have had to have spent more time there before kind of taking on that title.
People referred to you as the Canadian, and you've done a similar project to the New Yorker's book in London in the past. I'm kind of curious, what do you ever think about if you were to do this project in Nanaimo, what Nanaimo would come off as a character?
Yeah, I think being a Canadian can be sometimes helpful in that you're of a place but not of a place. You understand, the nuance of languages, but you still, get to ask a lot of questions. But these kind of projects, they're not based on nationality. They are based on curiosity. And I think any collection of people is going to yield a kind of richness. Of course, if you do a project in a city with 100,000 people, it would be different than 8 million people. But I don't doubt that a different sort of richness would emerge. So yeah, the Canadianness can be useful, just like everything can be useful in doing documentary work. You sort of have to embrace who you are. I can't go out and pretend I'm, Latino. I can't pretend I am what I'm not. But ultimately, it's just this collection of people, and any collection of people will yield, I believe, interesting results.
That's certainly true, looking at the book as far as I'm concerned. Another anecdote that stood out to me was there was a street photographer we heard from at one point, and he talked about how once a man stopped him and said, "Hey, you took my picture, you owe me." And he kind of talked about how, well, everyone really owes everyone. But it got me thinking, did you ever feel like the people you were speaking to who were talking to you, did you feel like you owed them something?
Yeah, there was a lot more of a give and take in New York, and certainly there was a lot more investment. I'm still really invested in the lives of more than a few of the interviewees. So New York was described to me as a city of implication, and you can't really just float above it and ask your questions and leave. You know, people want things. They want reaction from you, or they want something from you. And so that was a big part of my time in the city. But Gus, the street photographer, I think taps into something very true of anyone who writes fiction or takes photographs or uses this thing in some way. You know, of course, we're all kind of drawn from it. But a street photographer is taking, and as the guy that he's talking to on the street says, well, I'm using New York as well to hand out my flyers. So I like the idea of it being a place that, you know, we all can draw from in a way. There is a personal responsibility with interviewees, and it has to be done with respect and ethically. But yeah, there is a give and take as well. You know, I certainly wasn't, you know, apart from the project.
Yeah, you mentioned how you became implicated in people's lives, and something that I think made the book feel really contemporary was when the kind of COVID situation hit, and we got to hear about how that had impacted some of the people we'd already heard from in the book. What was it like living through that in New York?
It was terrifying for the time I was there, and when the border was going to close, I obviously came back to Canada. But for some of the people who I'd become close to, it was truly scary. And one of the interviewees, who is a personal injury lawyer, makes an appearance a couple times in the book. I got to know him over the course of many years, and then I vividly remember it around this time last year. He sent me an email with the subject line, "Something for the book." And it was, you know, him telling me that he was in hospital with COVID and it was very serious. And thankfully he got through. And thankfully for me, he was able to talk through his experience in such a vivid way that I think really, for me at least, brought what COVID was in New York home. And yet his way of dealing with COVID was very New York as well. He, you know, sat a chair down in front of him and addressed the chair as if it was the virus and said, "You think you're coming to New York? You think you're going to do this to this city? You got another thing coming." So I loved how unique the experience of COVID was for the people fighting it in the city. They did so with a real New York spirit.
Is there anything you hope people take away from reading the book? Anything in particular?
Well, for me, it's a really emotional book. It's about New York, but it's just people's lives. You know, it's the richness of human experiences, and it moves from the young to the old, the healthy to the ill. To, you know, with projects like this, you can create hopefully a kaleidoscopic portrait and hint at just the richness. And I hope that people take away from it just the beauty of the stranger. You know, the people who are different from us, the people we haven't been seeing over the last year because we've all been locked away. And I really hope that it will remind people of the joys of a crowded sidewalk in a city, the joys of being in proximity to those who are different from you, but can enrich your lives in so many ways, even if you never speak to them. You know, seeing a person across from you on a subway. So I hope that it just reminds people that, you know, as we come through what we've come through in the last year, that there's a great pleasure in all of these maddening, wonderful, crazy people that we share these cities with.
That's really poignant. I think we should leave it there. Craig, thanks so much for joining me.
Great. Well, thank you. Good to be on the Hometown Radio. Thanks, Joe.
Nanaimo's own Craig Taylor joining me to talk about his new book, New Yorkers, A City and Its People in Our Time. That's our show for today. Thank you for listening. Midcoast Morning is hosted and produced by Joe Pugh and Elijah Robinson. Thank you to Jesse Woodward and Arby Frew for production assistance. Our theme music is Good Company from Nanaimo band Ah Venice. You can find their music on Bandcamp. You can also help support Midcoast Morning as a project of CHLY's news department by making a donation at chly.ca/donate. Have a story you'd like us to cover? Or feedback on a previous story? Email us at news@chly.ca. Thank you for